Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Lifetime Legacy Lawyer podcast. I'm Thomas Vick. My co-host is Seth Wilson. We appreciate everybody joining us today. Seth, how are you?
Thomas, doing wonderful. We are fastly approaching graduation season around here, and I've got a lot of graduates in my house this year, so we're kind of scrambling to get ready for all that and that entails. And it's just a fun time of the year. We're really excited about that. Proud of all the accomplishments that everyone has made, and it just kind of got me thinking about perspective and how if you look back on something, the time just flies by. Or maybe it didn't because it was, not a great situation. But in terms of the years in college or the years in law school, for me, those were fun times, but boy, they went by quickly. And so kind of putting things into perspective and making sure that you're making the most of your time. So I thought maybe we could talk about a little bit of that perspective on today's episode.
Yeah, perspective is everything when it comes to your law practice. And discussing the topic for today, we thought that we would narrow it down to how to have a bird's eye view of your law practice. In the day-to-day management of the practice, we can get kind of buried in the tasks and buried in the client conversations. How do you, take a step back and realize how well you're doing or how poorly you're doing? Where are you in the business management of the law firm? So I thought that was a good topic for us, and I'll just open it up to you, Seth. How do you take a bird's eye view of your law practice?
Well, we've talked about Clio a lot in the past in terms of a practice management tool set that is available. And Clio has some great dashboards built in. There's kind of when you log in, you have that main personal performance dashboard. And that's something that you and I often review together to kind of say, hey, how are we doing against our goals for the year? And that's always a helpful gauge of the opportunities and lost opportunities, I guess, in some cases. But it reveals, hey, I'm doing okay against my goal for the year, or maybe I'm behind and I need to look at why that is. And so that's one way I keep that perspective and sort of daily motivation high, is looking at that primary dashboard that you see when you log into Clio. How do you use that particular dashboard, Thomas? Is that something that really informs what you do and helps you make decisions?
Yeah, we've talked about goal setting on the podcast before and how important goal setting is. And we usually have that kind of topic at the end of the year or at the beginning of each year. And having a goal set on that personal dashboard for what you want your revenue to be in a given year is a daily reminder. And you want to have a lofty goal for the year. But what I like about the Clio dashboard is that it has a monthly goal and a daily goal and even a weekly goal. And so you can kind of get lost in the weeds if you're just only looking at that yearly goal, and it can kind of seem daunting to you. But if you break it down into how am I doing this month, how am I doing this week, even just this day, it's a lot more doable for me. And I don't feel nearly as uneasy about meeting the expectation there, that goal that I had set. So I like it for the daily performance metrics and the weekly performance metrics. And I know if I met the goal for those two items, then ultimately my month is going to be good and my year is going to be good. It just helps me to, it motivates me. Hey, I need to make that additional phone call. I need to send that additional email so that the client that was thinking about hiring me will take that step and sign the engagement letter and send it back to me. It helps drive my behavior for the day because I'm looking at that goal each day.
Yeah. And again, we mentioned perspective, but also having sort of the today, week, month, and year constantly in front of you is a great horizon shift where you can say, I'm looking at today's day, and then I'm moving on to the weekly view and the monthly view and the year. And that helps me understand where I'm going today and where I want to go tomorrow and the week after and the week after that. And so I think one tendency I know I have to work through is I like all the charts and the graphs and trying to measure up to what I was hoping to accomplish that particular day. And I have to be very careful because I also like all the technology tools that are available, like Excel or Airtable or QuickBooks reporting. And you can get lost in making all of these charts and graphs for yourself without actually doing anything actionable with the data that's presented. And so I think balancing those two things to where the reporting is actually helping motivate your behavior is really important, not just downloading the data and not doing anything with it. So one thing I've done in recent months is stopped some of my recurring reports that show up automatically that I set up in Clio, because there's a lot of additional reporting that you can get to from a management perspective inside of Clio as well, in terms of who is billing what hours, what kind of task load are they carrying and completing, and all those kind of things. And really trying to boil that down to just the essential numbers that I'm really concerned about for the year. So in that vein, what in terms of kind of the financial decision-making points are you looking at in your practice to help you make decisions?
Well, I think I have learned a lot just from watching TV, believe it or not. I like watching a show that doesn't run anymore called The Profit by Marcus Lemonis, and also like to watch Shark Tank, which of course is continuing to run. But a lot of what they talk about is margin and what kind of profitability the business is. So I've always tried to keep track of what's the ratio of my net profit versus my gross revenue and figure out what that margin is. And I've done my own Googling, like what is a good profit margin for a law practice, for a solo law firm or a small law firm, what is it? And if you're in a 25 to 35% range, that's pretty good. That's pretty good. 25% may be a little bit low, but if you're at 35% or above, you're doing pretty well. At least in my opinion. So that measurable helps me to know, do I need to decrease my expenses, or do I need to hold off on making some other kind of expenditure? Because you can kind of predict where your revenue is going to be after you've done it for 2-3 years. You kind of predict where there are going to be some increases and some decreases, and you kind of know what what the water line is for you. And you kind of make decisions based upon what your revenue has been in the past and your operating expenses. And if you're still operating within that profit margin that you're seeking, then you can maybe be a little bit more aggressive with maybe a marketing campaign or maybe a new tool that you want to add to your practice. And really that's how I have added technology over the years. I had Office 365 and Clio at the very beginning of my practice in 2014, and I didn't have really anything in addition to that. I think I did have Lexus at a very minimal amount. It was like maybe $70 a month, something like that. But as the revenue increased, that allowed me to increase the tools that I had at my disposal and allowed me to know, hey, I think I can hire somebody as a legal assistant. Hey, I can hire an associate attorney. Hey, I can hire another paralegal. That kind of thing has been done because I know my numbers and how we're trending. And you can make decisions confidently if you know your revenue, if you know your expenses, and you operate within profitability.
Yeah, I think that's a great sort of bookend to that discussion in terms of how do you set maybe floor and ceiling is a better analogy than a bookend, but you're kind of looking at, hey, this is the floor that I have to be at. And in between the floor and the ceiling, I've got some room to move. And that's very comforting to know when you are taking that next step and hiring someone or adding in an additional recurring expense to the office, such as a software tool or something like that, that it's not going to put you in a bind to meet the obligations that you have. And it will allow you to increase, hopefully, the output of what you're doing, which then can hopefully increase those profit margins as you go. And I think there's also this tension to manage between the practice being a practice and the practice being a business. And those always thoughts that I have running around in my head because we deal with people most of the time in our practice. And when I'm interacting with a family, I'm not thinking about dollars and cents necessarily in that moment. I'm thinking about how do we solve this problem or what's happening here or how do we serve the clients. And so trying to sort of help yourself, I think we talked about this a couple weeks ago in terms of pricing services and those kind of things, made those decisions ahead of time can help you focus on that service aspect. And you know that you're going to be making sure that you're not making a profit that doesn't need to be made, but you're adjusting that as you go and trying to help balance out those two things. It's not, I'm going to try to squeeze every dollar I can out of this transaction. It's no, we know what it takes for our firm to run. We need to keep the lights on. We need to pay our staff and our team, but we've got to price things accordingly. And so it kind of all works together to help make the practice that you want and enjoy being a part.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, that when you're in the moment, when you are in front of the client, it's so important to be focused on the client and the problem that you have to solve. And you are wearing two hats. You're wearing the lawyer hat, but then you're also wearing I'm a CEO of a business. I've got to be thinking through the details of that and making sure that everyone for whom I'm responsible is going to be treated fairly in this transaction that I'm having with this client. And, so it's a balancing act. I haven't always done it perfectly, but I think the fact that you're, trying to balance that speaks to, somebody that's trying to be fair-minded for sure. We're talking about numbers and decision making and things like that. It's important to have up-to-date bookkeeping. Make sure that your income and your expenses are up to date, relatively near the time that they actually occurred, so that in real time you can make decisions. For me, that's with Clio accounting. I'm able to know all the deposits that have been made and all the expenses that have been made, and the profit loss numbers are easily provided to me. If there's a particular vendor that we're paying a lot of money to, I can keep track of those expenses, and everything is really consolidated. And I actually think in Clio accounting, there are fewer reports that are provided as compared to QuickBooks, but attorneys don't need the most complicated accounting. They need to be able to track their IOLTA account, and they need to be able to track their operating account and, savings accounts or whatever they might have. But there isn't a lot of fancy bookkeeping that has to be done for accounting. If you're just getting started, it'd be great for, the attorney to actually do the books themselves. But, pretty soon you're going to see the value of having somebody help you with those books and keeping all those transactions up to date, so that your time can be spent talking to those clients.
Yeah, that's a great point, Thomas, because I think there is an immense amount of value that comes from having to understand all of the steps it takes to bring a payment in, or to write a check out, or account for different things, or prepare the bills. But that's not something that you have to do long term. If you understand how it works, how it's applied, then you can help fix issues that may come up down the road. But I think it is so helpful to understand and get your head around some of these concepts that you may not have learned in college or law school if you didn't take accounting or something like that. I think you had taken maybe an accounting for lawyers class in law school. I did not. And so I basically taught myself through other people helping me, essentially, of, hey, this is how we figure out what revenue is. Here's how we figure out what we call all of these items, right? Because QuickBooks has an opinion about profit and loss, and Clio Accounting may have one, and you're sort of figuring that out as you go. Do you call it revenue? Do you call it profit? Do you call it income? And all of those kind of questions that come up. And so everybody kind of talks about it a little bit differently or sees it a little bit differently. And you need to define for your practice how you're going to look at that. And again, are you spending so much time trying to get those reports to match up to exactly how you want it to be? Or can you do the translation in your head and go, okay, that line item over there says this, but really that's what that represents. And that may not be a problem to solve today, that we're going to change, how those show up. But for me, we use QuickBooks Online in connection with Clio. And so Clio synchronizes the bills and invoices and payments between the two systems. And that's worked well for our office. And frankly, the cost in terms of time to make a change to that would probably not pay off in a short amount of time. And so I've not switched over to Clio Accounting for that reason, but it's always intriguing to me. And so again, I have to go back and fight that impulse of, okay, well, if I had everything under one roof in Clio's world, maybe that would even be more efficient, and just say, hey, this is working fine. There's not really a reason to change this up at this point.
Let me shift topics slightly. We're talking about how to have a bird's eye view of the law practice that you have. And we've really talked about dollars and cents and margins and things like that. But having a law practice is more than dollars and cents. It's people, it's assignments, it's tasks, it's research. And I think you could maybe break that down to maybe at least a couple different topics. One might be client relations. How do you have a bird's eye view of client relations and how your firm, whether it's your staff or other attorneys in your law practice, how do you have a gauge for how your firm is doing with client relations?
We use a client relationship management tool as part of the Clio suite of products called Clio Grow. And it had a different name years ago, and Clio bought it and kind of integrated it with Clio Manage. But that's really our way of tracking leads, if you will, if you want to use kind of the CRM nomenclature. And that's really that way that we have to say, if somebody contacts us about something, we want to make sure that we're not dropping the ball on that. And so that will go into the CRM, the customer relationship management tool set, and allow us to monitor that throughout a pipeline. And so we have processes built in to say, as soon as we have this new matter in Grow opened up, that we're reaching out to the client. Then we have a process, if we haven't heard from them for a while, to make sure that we're following up and we're the ones initiating that follow-up. And then also disengaging from that if they've decided not to move forward or if now's not the right time. And we want to make sure that if it's not now, but it may be later, we have a way of following up with them down the road. And so we have a pipeline that we've established over the years to help us with those different stages. And then also a pipeline to kind of go back and follow up and make sure that we're providing that service to the client, hopefully without being annoying and pressuring, because certainly that's not the goal. We want to make sure that we're serving the client well.
Yeah, I think having a pipeline, an organized manner of communicating with the client throughout every stage of the process, from first phone call, first email that is made to the law firm, all the way to disengagement, having a tracker on that is a way that you can do that. And that feature is, in Clio Grow, and it's also in Lawmatics and even in Clio Manage. Some level of Clio Manage, you're able to, have that pipeline in there where you can say, hey, this person has been in this pipeline stage for so many days. Why aren't we moving it? Have we not communicated with the client? Has the client gone silent? What's going on with that case? That's a way that you can keep track of what kind of communications are happening, what kind of relationships are there between the law firm and the client, and maybe it's emails that you send out to everybody that has come through your law firm, maybe to update them on, a change in the law. We recently talked about some of the FinCEN regulations and how you could have a blog post that is about that, and you can send it out to your email list and provide helpful content. And some of these CRMs will allow you to see what percentage of your clientele are actually opening the email. And that can kind of give you a gauge. Hey, these emails are being open, they're being useful, or maybe nobody's opening them at all, and I am missing the mark. I need to make some changes on that. So that's one way that you can keep track of client relationships. The other topic that I was going to mention on this, Seth, was how do you get a bird's eye view of tasks that need to be done in the law firm?
That's a tough one for any law firm. And I think it gets tougher as things scale. And I've actually been doing quite a bit of research on this, just personally trying to get my head around what's the best way to do that. And you and I have actually kind of hit a point, I think, with the number of matters and clients that we're serving on a particular year, especially as you introduce additional staff to the firm, to where now I'm responsible for making sure all of these items get handled, but I may have assigned that task to someone else. And so how do I go back inside that tool, see what I've assigned to everybody else and see where that status is? And is it moving forward? Is it overdue? And how do I do that without spending all my time clicking into every little thing and adjusting every little variable that I can in terms of in progress or reviewed or due dates or those kind of things? And so I think one of the things I'm learning, and again, still fresh on the research on this, is just more on the project management side of making sure that, one, first and foremost, something's not falling through the cracks. And so you have to review, even if I've created a mess where I've got, a task or a task list of 15 items that gets assigned to a matter every time that matter gets opened up. Well, if I open 10 matters, I've got a lot of tasks to deal with. So how do you take that into the next model, which is kind of that pipeline model, where instead of tasks, we have stages for a matter, and we know what the tasks are surrounding that stage. And so that's frankly right where I am in our practice in terms of saying, okay, we've hit a point where the scale is actually tipping the wrong direction, and we're spending more time managing the day-to-day tasks and just saying, wow, this one's overdue, I got to move it ahead. And there's ways to do that efficiently, but it's started to become evident that something's going to need to adapt there and get changed to help us manage that. And so I think that bird's eye view is pulling back, looking at your team and going, hey, there may be a bigger problem here that the individual one-to-one task situation just isn't going to help us as much as it used to. And we may need to even consider changing up the methodology that we're utilizing to get the work through the office.
Yeah, I definitely, that hits home for me as far as tasks are concerned. So yeah, I kind of started out with having probably 12 to 15 tasks in an estate planning task list. And, with a relatively few number of estate plans coming through, that's pretty manageable. But as my firm has grown, I've had a greater number. It's a force multiplier, right? So just like you said, 10 times 15 tasks, that's 150 tasks. That's a lot. And how do you reduce that down into bite-sized pieces? So much of this is reducing the task, the goal, into bite-sized fragments or what have you, so that you can accomplish great things and not be overwhelmed by everything that you're trying to do. So I like that idea of breaking the tasks up into, at the beginning stage, at maybe the first part of the middle stage, the second part of the middle stage, the final stage of each particular life of the case. Then you're able to reduce those from like 15 tasks in a list to maybe 3 to 5 at each stage, and it becomes much more manageable. So I definitely agree with you on that. And with Clio Manage AI, you're able to have you can ask the question, hey, what does so-and-so have to do today? And, if tasks are lined up and the calendar is lined up the way that it's supposed to, then you're going to get accurate information, and you can kind of see, oh, this is what this person has going on. I probably shouldn't assign another task to him today because it'll just be too much. And so I found that to be somewhat helpful. I could probably use that a little bit more to figure out, hey, what is this person actually thinking about? And that's an advancement in AI that's really neat. Otherwise, I would be clicking through every single matter to see what task needs to be completed and what calendar appointments are on the schedule for today. All that kind of stuff is taken care of by a lot of the AI capability.
Yeah, and the old adage is garbage in, garbage out. So if your lists and information are no good, they're not going to give you any good information from an AI standpoint. You're just going to see how bad it is quicker. So you want to make sure that the data integrity is well maintained and up to date in terms of what you're doing. And also remember that ultimately the person who caused this mess is probably the person you're looking at in the mirror, and you got to take responsibility for it. And it's a good thing as time has grown, but I think being aware of, man, this modality worked for this season and it may not work moving forward. And that's the scalability piece that you're going to have to wrestle with and figure out, okay, what changes do I need to make sure that we're still accomplishing what we need to accomplish, but we're not spending so much time on the data entry piece and moving things around because we've outgrown what was formerly possible. And now we need to start looking at what's next. And then recognizing that it's going to take a lot of effort to get from that level to the next level, because you're going to have to clean up what you've got here before you're ready to take on in full the new and improved methodology. More to come on that. I think we can talk a little bit more deeply about those underlying sort of structures and how to set those up and what tools in Clio might work well for that. But ultimately, it's a great problem to have because you're looking at a caseload that needs to be handled and handled well without letting anything fall through the cracks.
Yeah. I appreciate the discussion today, Seth. We want to remind everybody to go to lifetimelegacylawyers.riverside.com. Go check out our website and also go to youtube.com and follow the podcast. We appreciate everybody subscribing and checking in, and we hope that we will be a resource to everyone as we help lawyers launch. Anything in closing thoughts here, Seth?
Thomas, I just appreciate the opportunity to chat. It does help me when we have these conversations think of things a little bit differently, and also think of how am I explaining what I do? What's all the craziness that goes on inside my head that's coming out? Do I sound like I don't know what I'm talking about? Or, so wrestling with that, making sure that accountability is there, I think is really helpful. Hopefully that does help someone else who's sort of struggling through or wrestling with these topics as well. So look forward to chatting with you again next time, Thomas, and we will see you then.
Thank you, Seth. Take care, everybody.